All right, we're in Book 4, Chapter 31. The last thing that has happened in Chapter 30 is that the British, who had been chased away and had retreated, are seeing the terrible situation that the Romans are in, and they sort of come up with a conspiracy to attack again. Even though they've made a treaty with Caesar and begged him for a treaty, they are going to go back on their deal and attack the Romans again, because they see that they're not in a very good situation. At Caesar, etsi nondum eorum consilia cognoverat, tamen et ex eventu navium suarum, et ex eo quod obsides dare intermiserant, fore id quod accidit suspicabatur. Okay. At, we've seen a few times, is an alternate form of said. But Caesar, and then we have commas that set off this phrase. Always look for your punctuation to help you out as much as you can. So we have a verb here, cognoverat, which tells us that probably we're at the end of a phrase and it's followed by a comma, so that gives us another hint. Et si is really two words put together, and so is non dum. And sometimes in Latin, when you put two words together, it'll kind of mean the same thing, but sometimes we get different meanings. Et si is like and if, but what does that mean, and if? Well, et si together means even if or although something, blah, blah, blah. And the non-doom's like that. It's kind of similar, but not really. Non means not, right? And doom usually means while. It can sometimes mean until, but if you put them together, it means not yet. So, although not yet, if we read from left to right, eorum with the O-R-U-M is genitive plural. It's masculine or neuter. Consilia is a good word to know for Caesar. A concilium is a plan, or sometimes it's advice. So the A there, because it usually ends in an it means it's neuter, and then if you make it plural, you turn it to an A. So concilia is plural. And then cognoverat, the V followed by erat means it's pluperfect. Neuter plural. So although he had, we'll put the had in there for pluperfect, had not yet sort of found out or had not yet known, the concilia eorum, the plans of them, or in English to make it better, you can say their plans. And eorum refers back to the British and their plan to attack again. Caesar doesn't know about their plan. He thinks they're still going to abide by the treaty. Tamen, however, so even though that, however, et, and then we have two ets, which of course is going to mean something special. So think about that, see if you can remember. Two ets means both X and Y, or both A and B. So both ex eventu navium. Eventu looks like event, and it has that idea. It means outcome, issue, result, or consequence. I'm reading from the book. The book suggests you translate it as fate, like the thing that happened. From the fate, navium. Navis is third declension, so when you have an ending, it kind of is tricky. It looks maybe like it's accusative, but because it's third declension, the accusative would be em, not um. So really the is genitive plural. So make sure you can see that in the grammar. Suarum, it's kind of like eorum up in the previous line, genitive plural, but this one's feminine. And so navis is feminine, so those two things go together. So from the fate of his own ships. Now in English, his own would be sort of masculine, but in Latin, our adjectives always describe, or they always follow the gender of the noun they're describing. So suarum is feminine, but it's feminine because of navis. In English, we're going to say his ships, like his own ships, because we're talking about Caesar. So because of that thing, both that and from eo quod, which is, the book suggests, from this, that. So a would be this, and quod would be that. You can sort of supply like from the fact that. So both from the fate of his ships and from the fact that, and the fact from the fact that is ex eo quod altogether. Obsides dare intermiserant. So Obsides, this is back a few chapters when the British were pleading with Caesar for a treaty. One of the things that they promised was hostages, and they gave a part, and then some of them had to be sent from far away, and so they promised that they would give a part later. So the hostages, dare is infinitive. We're going to have to keep in mind that it's infinitive till we understand why. Intermiserant. Intermiserant means, if you look at it, it's really miserant and inter. Miserant would come from mitto, mitre, misi, misus. So it looks like to send between. But if you look at your book, sometimes when a word you know doesn't make sense, there are more definitions. So the book gives you another definition to delay, which is probably going to be a good one. And then our errant tells us it's pluperfect from the fact that they had delayed to give the hostages. We're going to read basically backwards. So those hostages they had promised, they're not sort of making good on. Fore id quod accidit suspicabatur. Fore is sort of an alternate form for futurum esse. Futurum esse they probably would have used a lot, and it's kind of long, and so they've came up with this shortened form that'll just cut down on words because they use it so often. So that's really a future infinitive, fore. Id quod, which I know we've seen before, and it's a good little stock phrase to memorize. Id quod means that which, or the thing which. Accidit, I feel like we've seen that recently too. The thing which happened, like an accident is something that just happens. Suspicibatur. The subject of suspicibatur, we're going to go way back up to the front, is Caesar. Caesar, although he had not found out about their plans, blah, 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 he was suspecting, and this is deponent, which is why we have a passive ending on it, suspicabatur. It's imperfect, deponent, third person singular, indicative, active. No, well, deponent, not active. He was suspecting, and this is where we need our infinitive. This introduces an indirect statement. So plus ind state. So you remember, the subject's accusative, the verb is infinitive. So that's where we can get our futurum esse, or fore. So they had failed to, or they had delayed to send hostages, or neglected to send hostages. He was suspecting sort of the thing which happened would happen. O Caesar. So you might want to take your id quod accidit first. He was suspecting the thing which happened, and then your futurum, it would happen. And so he was knowing that it was going to happen. He was suspecting it would happen, the thing which happened. So, of course, Caesar, being able to predict the future there, he has no reason to believe that they aren't going to hold up their end of the bargain, but he's just so smart that he suspects something. He can read it in the wind. Okay, so their ships and the hostages sort of tipped him off. And then this next part, itaque ad omnes casus subsidia comparabant. But. So ad omnes casus goes together. This is all accusative. Casus is fourth, which is why it just goes us, and everything's us. And so, here ad doesn't really mean two. In English we'd say more like four. And casus, I believe we've seen the Aeneid, maybe in Caesar at some point. And something bad that happens. Don't confuse it with the word cause, which people think, or the word case. It is something that takes place, like when we say in this case, in this instance, but it's really usually a bad thing, like a misfortune or a disaster or a calamity. So for all misfortunes, for all disasters, like for all circumstances, subsidia comparabat, he was preparing, and that's that, you see that parabat, it just has a prefix on it. So he was preparing subsidia, which we've seen before in Caesar. One subsidium, two subsidia, so this is the plural, neuter. He was preparing sort of help. The book is reserve forces. He's preparing help for any misfortune. So he can take that time and become prepared before anything bad happens. I don't know if you can hear it, it's raining really hard. Nam et frumentum ex agris quotidie in castra conferebat. We'll stop there because there's a verb. Now notice, whenever bad things happen, it's always nostri who are doing it. Our soldiers are doing this and our soldiers are doing that. Whenever good things happen, we say Caesar, right? Caesar was suspecting all this stuff would happen, and he was preparing to help, right? The soldiers weren't doing it, it was Caesar. And here we have again, for et frumentum ex agris quotidie. And you can take your and in wherever you want, or even, you can say for even, frumentum, which we've heard about, grain, ex agris, from the fields. Make sure you get that agris is ablative plural, not ablative singular. Is. Quotidie means every day. In English we have this word quotidian, it starts with a QU, but it comes from quotidie, and the DA there is day. Quotidie, every day. From the fields every day in castra. Castra is another neuter plural. We keep saying these. They're everywhere. One castrum, two castra. When you talk about military camps, castra is always plural because it's the idea of it has many tents in it, so many camps. But you just translate it singularly. Into the camp, conferebat. And you can see ferebat, and that it has a prefix. Fero fere tu leilatus, right, to carry. So he was carrying grain from the fields every day into the camps. Caesar, personally was doing this. And we have another et. We could take maybe the first one as a both. I was looking for an et and I didn't see it. He was both carrying grain into the camps, and okay, now we're going to take care of these ships. So not only does they have a food problem, they have a ship problem. Quae gravissime afflictae erant naves. Our relative pronoun here, quae, doesn't refer to anything yet. So let's translate this part, but you may want to put it later in your sentence in English, because it just says which. Which, gravissime, you see that ISSI means it's superlative. And when you change the us, like gravissimus is what we usually say, to an E, it makes it an adverb. So very seriously, or very greatly. Afflictae, it sounds like the word, like afflicted. If you're afflicted with something, you're hurt. So this is damaged or injured. Which very greatly injured were naves, ships. So, like which ships were very greatly injured. Make sure you get that superlative in there. But it doesn't make sense yet, so let's get the rest of this and maybe put it together. Earum materia atque aere ad reliquas refeciendas utebator. So we can stop there because we have our verb. Earum, we've seen eorum and suarum, and now we have earum, of them. And it's feminine, but it doesn't go to anything, it refers back to the ships. And then materia, we get the word material from, obviously, but it's not just any material, it's actually timber, or lumber, wood that you used to build something with. So the material of those, and there's this understood ships, and now we can take our relative clause. The material of those ships, which were the most seriously injured. So really in English, you don't want to take your naves in your relative clause, you want to take it in the main clause. But in Latin, it makes sense to have your relative clause first. So the ones which were most seriously injured ships, the timber of them, and then you have to get your aire. Aire is a great word. It's bronze. Ais is the nominative, AES. Ice, iris. Bronze or copper. I was thinking of it as bronze. The book says copper. Now I'm confused. Did they have copper? Isn't copper a collection of different metals? I'll have to look this up. I'll write myself a note. Copper. I think of it as bronze. So not only their lumber, but also their bronze, their copper. And you can see now aire is in the ablative, and so materia could have been nominative, but now that probably it's ablative there. Ad reliquas reficiendas. For, and this is a gerundive. How do I know it's a gerundive and not a gerund? Well, we got our nd, right? That tells us it's one of them. Gerunds, remember, are verbal nouns, and gerundives are verbal adjectives. So the thing about gerundives is that they describe things. And reficiendas, you can tell because of the endings, describes reliquas. Gerundives have more forms than gerunds. Gerundives can be feminine, like this one with the as. Gerunds can't. This is also plural, and gerunds cannot be plural. It's just, they just have four endings, e, o, o. And that's it. And gerundives, because they're adjectives, they have to be able to describe all sorts of nouns, so they have all sorts of endings. So, and then utebator is utor, which we know takes the ablative. So when you use something in Latin, that something's going to be ablative. So that's where we can fit in our ablatives. He was using the lumber or timber of those ships and the bronze. Why? And this is a gerundive of purpose. It tells you what the purpose is. Latin says for the remaining about to be repaired, but in English, gerundives don't exist. This is where we can say to repair the rest, or the remaining ones. So it's kind of hard to put that all together, but it's possible. You just want to, maybe you're thinking about chunking your phrases, right? Which things go together, and then you can rearrange the different sections to make sense in English without changing what it says. That's okay. Yeah.
Did it rain? My gosh. Okay, let it rain, and let it rain more tomorrow, and then after 12 noon tomorrow, let it stop.
Yeah. It's nice to have rain.
Huh?
It's nice to have the rain.
Yeah, it is. I just don't like to drive in it.
All right. The quae here is a relative pronoun. And it ad eos res goes together. Erant is imperfect, and then usi is dative. In Latin, when you say something's useful, you say it was like for a use. Ex continenti comportare ubebant all goes together. And the things which, you have to add that sort of things before your quae to make the relative pronoun refer back to something. So the things which were for use, ad eos res. Remember, res can be like a situation or a business or affair, so maybe situation, like for these situations, referring back to the ships. So the things which were useful, which were for a use for these situations. Ex continenti, from the continent, comportari. So remember that when you have an infinitive that ends in an I, like this, comportari, it's really passive. So if you look up comporto, comportare, so it means like to carry. See that portare in there is with a prefix. We see lots of, we have been seeing lots of compound words. Eubeblat's your actual verb. He was ordering to be sort of brought over, carried over from the continent. So they do need some other materials, but he's basically cannibalizing a few of the ships to get the things he needs to fix the ones that are remaining. Oh, Caesar's so smart, so good at making himself sound smart. Right, and then we have all these things. We know Caesar's not doing this. Right, we know he's not carrying the grain in. We know he's not fixing the ships. Right, he's not using the lumber. He's ordering people to do this, but he makes it sound very much like he is personally making these things happen. And so, atque cum sumo studio a militibus administraretur. When you try to decide whether cum is going to introduce a cum clause or if it's an actual preposition, one of the easiest things to do is to check the word directly after it. Is it ablative? So if you do that here, oh look, sumo studio is ablative, but this is actually a cum clause. So sometimes you have to go all the way down to your verb administraretur, and oh look, it's imperfect subjunctive. Is there any reason for it to be subjunctive? No. Well, so this has to be a cum clause then, instead of cum the preposition with. So that's one way when you're trying to decide, is it with or when or since. And the book says this is causal, so let's say because or since to make it causal. Sumo studio is manner, so it's how, with the greatest or highest. Studio, I like to say zeal, you can say enthusiasm. A militibus, by the soldiers. Administraretur. Administrare means to manage, serve, attend. So this is a little bit impersonal. So because it was being managed, and it would refer back to all of this stuff that he's saying, that all that stuff was being managed by the soldiers with the greatest enthusiasm. And then this next section in between our commas, that's an ablative absolute. Ablative absolutes are beautiful. There's lots of ways you can translate them. You could say just straight up with the noun having been verb. That's the most literal way. But as we see more and more of them, it's good to start kind of branching out into ones that fit the translation better. So you can say things like because the noun had been verbed, since the noun had been verbed, when the noun had been verbed. And the book here suggests we say although. This is although we lost the 12 ships. I think that's getting a little far away from the ablative absolute thing. Although would be a good way to start. Although 12, that's XII, right? 10 and then 1. 12 ships had been lost. I wouldn't want to say we in there, just because you want to keep the participle really passive-like. You don't say we lost 12 ships, but 12 ships were lost. You try to stay as close as you can to the Latin. So, I mean, we can say that, it sounds fine. So since, blah, 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 although 12 ships had been lost, missus, we saw inter miserant earlier from mito mitere. This is the same mito mitere misi misus. And it kind of throws people off. People think it means to send away, but it really means to lose something. It's kind of like been sent away unintentionally. You don't know where it is. Reliquis ut navigare satis commode posset effecit. So isn't it? I think it looks very ugly to have two verbs next to each other. So we have a little embedded clause. Ut to posset is a phrase. And really, reliquis belongs in there. It's just outside the phrase. And then effecit is our main verb that starts the phrase. Verbs are like punctuation. When you get to a verb, you're sort of at the end. So posset's the end of one phrase, and then effecit's the end of the main phrase. The subject's still Caesar. That's why it's singular. It's not the soldiers. Things are being managed by the soldiers. He, effecit means to make something come about, to do something. He rendered it or caused. And then the ut is a result. It's the result of him causing it. And we can get a feel of that with like our sumo, like they're doing it with the greatest zeal. He made it so that blah blah blah, and the result is he caused a result that Nawigari, again, it's our infinitive with an I, so it's a passive infinitive, not to sail but to be sailed. I skipped over reliquies. The book says ablative of means, so long IS, and there's an understood Nawibus, and they're the remaining ships, of course. And so ablative means we're going to have to buio fat, by, with, and on, from, at, than. To be sailed, satis commode. Commode means easily, comfortably, conveniently. Satis commode together, it's like, oh yeah, like pretty easily, in the sense of very easily. Yeah, it's easy enough. Like when you're like, oh, can you just, oh yeah, it's easy enough. Like, yeah, pretty easy. Posset. That it is possible to be sailed easily enough by the remaining ships, which sounds awful in English, but literally is what it says. That is able to be sailed easily enough by the remaining. So they're able to fix the ships. They're working with such zeal that even though they've lost 12 ships, the rest of them can sail easily now. So they've patched everything together, taken the ones that were the most damaged, and used the material that they had for the other ships. So there you go. That was 31. I'll start 32. We may not get it finished, but there you go.